Have you ever walked into a room and felt instantly measured by eyes that never knew your story? Not for your actions, not for your character, but for the quiet threat your presence carried. There are people who mistake arrogance for strength and silence for weakness. They smile to belittle, advise to dominate, and praise to position themselves above you. But what if their need to prove superiority is not a sign of power, but a flaw you can read and turn to your advantage? Stoic wisdom teaches us this. True power is not reactive. It does not seek to be loud or seen. It observes, it listens, and it never plays the game it did not choose. Today, you will discover why mastering your own ego is the only way to disarm theirs. Why those who think they're above you are often blind to the one who watches in stillness. This is not just strategy, it is restraint, it is clarity, it is freedom. If you've ever been underestimated, keep watching. What you're about to learn may change how you respond forever. 1. The subtle game of ego. Have you ever walked into a room and felt something shift, not in the air, but in the way someone looks at you? It's not always obvious. No one says anything cruel, but you feel it. The glance that lingers a moment too long, the half smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes, and then a seemingly harmless remark, carefully wrapped in civility. "Oh, you made it. That's a good thought. I used to think that way too." At first it sounds polite, encouraging even. But if you listen closely, you'll hear what they're really saying. "I'm above you. Stay where you are." This isn't aggression. It's subtle superiority, and it's one of the most common ways ego tries to assert itself. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't attack. It frames. Because ego doesn't need to destroy you. It only needs you to question yourself. Stoic philosophy teaches us to see beyond appearances, to observe not just what is said, but what is implied. And in moments like this, the implication is clear. Someone is using false kindness to place you beneath them. Their ego, hungry for validation, needs to feel taller. But instead of growing, they push you down. Here's the trap. If you don't recognize it, you'll respond exactly as they hoped. You'll start explaining yourself, justifying why you belong, proving you're worthy. And the moment you do that, you've handed them control. You've stepped into their game. The Stoics would warn against this. Because the moment your worth becomes something to be defended, it becomes something to be questioned. Epictetus once said, "If someone tried to hand you a dead fish, you wouldn't accept it. So why accept their judgment?" The same principle applies here. That smile layered with condescension. It's not yours to carry. That comment meant to subtly lower you. Let it fall to the floor. You don't need to pick it up. But we're human, and it's tempting. Especially when it comes from someone we admire or in a room where we want to be seen. You might feel the urge to speak more, to over-explain, to prove you're just as capable. But here's the paradox. The more you try to prove your worth in a space where someone questions it, the more you affirm their illusion of being above you. Not because you are lesser, but because you've accepted the frame they've created. True strength is quiet. It doesn't flinch when misunderstood. It doesn't panic when judged. It simply remains. The person who stands firm in themselves doesn't rush to correct every misperception. They let others reveal their character by how they treat silence, how they respond when their subtle provocations are met with stillness. Imagine this. You walk into the same room. Someone gives you the same smug comment, but this time, instead of leaning forward to explain, you smile, you nod once, and you remain exactly as you are. You don't shrink, you don't chase, you don't defend, you just stay. In that moment, something powerful happens. The game collapses, because it only works if you play. When you stop playing, you stop feeding their illusion, and without your reaction, they have nothing to stand on. This is what it means to reclaim your presence. Not by proving yourself louder, but by staying rooted in what you know to be true. Your worth isn't in how well you respond, it's in how little you need to. The Stoics called this ataraxia, a state of unshakable tranquility. A calm that comes not from being untouched, but from knowing how little other people's judgments truly matter. And in this age of constant comparison and social performance, this calm is a rare force. It speaks without speaking. It asserts without force. And it draws respect, not through domination, but through quiet certainty. So the next time you feel that subtle sting of being looked down on, pause. Don't defend. Don't perform. Just notice. Their superiority is not real, it's a mask worn by insecurity, and your silence, your calm refusal to play, is not weakness. It is discipline, it is power. It is proof that you are not shaped by the room you walk into, but by the standard you hold within. This is the first move. Not to fight ego with ego, but to see through it. Not to chase approval, but to remain present. And from here, we begin to uncover what happens when you stop reacting and start reading. Because in the next part, we'll see exactly how ego doesn't confront you, it seduces you into revealing yourself. 2. Don't react. That's the trap. Ego doesn't always shout. It doesn't march in with insults or direct attacks. No, the ego plays a subtler game. It doesn't hit you head on. It lures you in, slowly, casually, with a soft voice and a smile that masks intention. It disguises itself as advice. It sounds like concern, but underneath the words is a single motive: control. You've heard it before. A comment that sounds like guidance, but lands like a wound. Just trying to help becomes a quiet way to make you feel small. You should think about it this way becomes a thin veil for condescension. They won't say, "You're beneath me," but their tone, their posture, their choice of words, everything is saying exactly that. And if you're not careful, if you don't pause, you'll fall into the very trap they've laid. You'll start proving yourself, correcting their assumptions, defending your worth. And in that moment, they've won. Not because they were right, not because they were stronger, but because you responded emotionally. You handed them your attention, your energy, your center. The Stoics warned us of this. They taught that a wise person must never give control of their inner state to the outside world. Epictetus said, "When someone irritates you, it is not their actions that disturb you, but your judgment about them." In other words, it's not what they say, it's how we choose to respond, and ego knows this. That's why it doesn't provoke you with direct offense. It dances around your pride. It taps your insecurity. It knows that if it can awaken a need inside you, a need to be seen, to be validated, to be respected, you'll start reacting without realizing it. You'll trade your posture for performance. You'll rise to their level thinking you're matching them, but in truth, you've already accepted the role they assigned you. Because when you respond from emotion, you're not leading anymore. You're following. You're not choosing. You're reacting. That's the great reversal. They act superior and you try to match them, not realizing that in doing so, you're reinforcing the very hierarchy you want to escape. This is where Stoic detachment becomes not just a virtue, but a shield. Detachment doesn't mean cold indifference. It means being aware. Aware enough to recognize when your pride is being baited. Aware enough to see the game, but not play it. Aware enough to hear the invitation to prove yourself and calmly decline. Imagine you're in a conversation and someone subtly challenges you. They smirk as they speak. They imply that you haven't thought deeply enough or that your perspective is naive. The old response might rise, "Let me explain. Actually, I've done the research." You're wrong. But the Stoic response is different. It begins with a pause, a breath, a choice. You remind yourself, "I do not exist to prove myself to people who seek to unsettle me." So instead, you smile, you listen. You acknowledge without submitting, and when the time is right, you either speak with calm precision or not at all. That is power, not the loud kind, the grounded kind. The kind that does not move just because someone else pushed. In that space of restraint, you stay rooted. You don't rise to their level because you never sank below your own. You're not playing defense, you're choosing presence. And in doing so, you disarm their strategy entirely. Ego thrives on reaction. Your silence is starvation. Your calm is a mirror. And in that mirror, they start to see themselves more clearly than they want to. That's when things begin to shift. Because the one who does not flinch, does not defend, and does not engage on their terms, becomes the one who controls the pace. So remember this. You don't win by outshouting ego. You win by not giving it a stage. You win by not giving it your peace. And the moment you realize that you are under no obligation to react, you free yourself from the trap. Now we move to a deeper level, because once you've resisted reacting, the next step is understanding how to observe without being seen, to let their ego talk while you quietly gather every move. Let's explore how silence isn't just resistance, it's strategy. 3. Stop performing. Start observing. This is the game of ego. It doesn't shout commands or demand submission. It doesn't need to. All it has to do is provoke you, subtly, deliberately, and then sit back while you play the part it's silently assigned to you. You see, in most social situations, the person who speaks the most is not the one in control. It's the one who's performing, the one who watches, listens, and reads the room. That's the strategist. That's the one who holds the advantage. When someone believes they're superior, their first move is almost always the same: get you to dance. They want you to try to impress them, to seek their validation, to show them that you care what they think. They want you to fill the silence with explanations and qualifications, because the more you talk, the easier you are to read. The more you explain, the more you reveal. And slowly, without even realizing it, you become predictable, containable, easy to manage. They now know where your buttons are, what your doubts sound like, what your insecurities echo. That's why some of the smartest people lose in social games. Not because they lack intellect or intention, but because they get emotionally pulled into the need to be recognized. They confuse visibility with value, and they begin performing in rooms that were never built to honor who they are. And it's subtle. You don't even realize you're doing it. You just want to be understood. You just want to clarify. You want them to see your depth. But here's the paradox. Every time you try to prove your worth to someone who sees themselves as above you, you start feeling smaller. Because if you were truly secure in your worth, why would you argue for it? That's the trap. The moment you explain, you imply you need permission. The moment you defend, you imply something is under attack. And that's exactly what ego-based manipulators feed on. They don't want your agreement, they want your reaction. They want to stir your pride, touch your uncertainty, poke your need for recognition. And if you haven't resolved those places within yourself, their words will land. They'll echo in your mind long after the conversation ends, not because they spoke truth, but because they awakened something in you that's still unresolved. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes not just an idea, but a daily discipline. The Stoics didn't teach us to be numb, they taught us to be unmoved by what doesn't serve the soul. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about you." Think about that the next time someone tries to draw you into a performance. They don't need your performance. And you don't need their stage. Instead of reacting, practice observing. Instead of speaking, let silence work for you. The person who can remain still while others try to provoke them is not weak. They are grounded. Their power isn't visible, but it's deeply felt. There's a quiet strength in not rushing to explain who you are. There's clarity in knowing you don't owe your truth to someone who hasn't earned the right to hear it. The key is this: the moment you feel the need to prove, pause. Ask yourself, is this for clarity or for validation? One is rooted in wisdom, the other in ego. And if it's ego that's moving you, step back, breathe, recenter. You have nothing to prove to someone who needs to diminish others in order to feel tall. Let them perform. Let them speak. Let them fill the room with their opinions and clever remarks. Your role is not to match their performance. Your role is to remain steady, still, stoic. Because in the end, the one who does not flinch is the one who cannot be controlled. Now that you've learned how to resist the urge to perform, it's time to take this further, because the real shift happens when you stop being reactive and start being invisible, not as weakness, but as strategy. Let's explore how silence becomes your sharpest weapon. 4. Master the power of no reaction. You don't need to prove they're wrong. That urge you feel to explain yourself, to defend your truth, to correct their false superiority, that's not strength. That's untreated ego, and they can smell it. The moment they sense that you need to win, need to be seen as right, they'll push and push and push until you crack, until your calm breaks, until you give them what they want most, your emotional reaction. And when that moment comes, they won't respond with compassion. They'll smile, step back, and say, "See, I told you they were unstable." This is what most people never notice. When someone acts like they're better than you, they're not testing your intelligence. They're testing your composure. They're studying the tension in your shoulders, the flicker in your eye, the way your voice shifts when you feel cornered. They don't need facts. They don't even need truth. They just need to poke until you flinch. Because once you do, the balance shifts, not because they've grown stronger, but because you've handed over your control. Ego feeds on control, and control doesn't begin with dominance, it begins with the smallest win, a raised eyebrow that gets under your skin, a smug comment that lingers in your chest, a laugh at your expense that you try to ignore but can't quite forget. The moment they sense that your ego is agitated, they double down. They lean in. The smaller you feel, the bigger they become. And so the game continues, until one of you breaks pattern. And here's the Stoic truth. You break the game not by winning louder, but by not playing at all. You don't beat ego with more ego. You don't overcome arrogance by raising your voice. You overcome it by remaining still, because silence is not absence, it's presence, it's intention, it's self-control, and nothing unnerves an egotistical person more than someone who won't react. Think of it this way. You're in a room and someone tries to pull you into a performance. They challenge you subtly. They imply you don't belong. They expect you to defend, to engage, to escalate, but you don't. You just watch. You let them act. You let them speak. And while they think they're leading the scene, you are the only one truly seeing the scene. This is the shift. When you understand the game, you let them play their role. You don't try to rewrite their script, you let them read their lines. Because you're not there to convince them of anything, you're there to observe, and when you choose not to react, something powerful happens. You become unreadable, unshakable. You become a mirror that gives nothing back, and ego cannot handle a mirror that won't reflect. Marcus Aurelius taught that the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. So don't argue, observe, don't defend, plan, don't react, disarm. When you decide there's nothing to prove, you rise above the arena entirely. You become rare. A person who doesn't need to be right to feel whole. A person who doesn't need to win a moment to hold their position. In this kind of presence, you don't lose power, you absorb it. Your silence speaks louder than their accusations. Your restraint carries more weight than their dominance, and the balance tilts quietly in your favor. So the next time someone pushes your buttons, don't push back. Let them wonder why you don't flinch. Let them talk. Let them perform. And while they try to control the room, you stay rooted in the one thing they cannot touch, your inner peace. If you've ever held back a reaction and realized it gave you the upper hand, type unmoved in the comments. And if you want more tools to sharpen your mind and steady your emotions, subscribe now. That way, you'll be ready not just to face the world, but to rise above it. Now that you've learned the power of no reaction, it's time to go deeper into how you can observe their ego without revealing your own. Because the one who reveals nothing learns everything. And in the next part, you'll discover why silence isn't retreat, it's control. 5. Use underestimation as leverage. Let them think they're ahead. Let them talk. Let them shine. Let them look down at you with quiet pride and convince themselves you pose no threat. Because that's when they relax. That's when they stop watching their own back. That's when they become sloppy. And that, right there, is where the quiet mind wins. In psychological conflict, the most effective move isn't aggression. It's conscious surrender. Let them take the first round. Let them feel victorious. Not because you are weak, but because they have no idea what you're actually seeing. Their ego, swollen with self-importance, begins to blind them. And once blind, they overshare. They reveal their position, their patterns, their insecurities. They stop seeing you as someone to watch, and that's your window. In every ego-driven interaction, there are only two roles. One person is acting, the other is observing. The actor needs attention, the observer collects truth. And the moment you respond too early, whether through correction, explanation, or defensiveness, you step into the script they've prepared for you. But if you stay still, calm, curious, and seemingly inexperienced, something different unfolds. They think they're leading. They think you're listening. But in truth, they're performing in your theater. Every sentence they utter, every exaggerated gesture, every assumption they make becomes a piece of intelligence you didn't ask for, but now own. That's the paradox of restraint. By doing less, you see more. By saying nothing, you hear everything. Let their ego do the talking. Let them believe they've figured you out. And while they speak to impress, you gather information in silence. Their arrogance becomes your clarity. Their assumptions become your map. This is where the Stoic gains his edge. Because while most people are busy trying to control perception, the Stoic refuses to be perceived in haste. He lets others define him only to later dismantle their definitions in one clean moment. When the time comes, you won't need to argue, you won't need to perform. One calm move, delivered with clarity and without explanation, is enough to break every illusion they held about you. Remember, the loudest person in the room often seeks the most validation. The person who quietly listens, who asks questions, who remains calm, that person is rarely forgotten. Why? Because they disrupt the pattern without force. They carry no obvious ambition, but their presence creates tension. Not because they're trying to dominate, but because they cannot be read. People feel safest around the predictable, and when you don't explain yourself, when you don't rise to their frame, they begin to feel uneasy. Their assumptions start to collapse from within, not because you confronted them, but because you didn't. And that's the heart of Stoic strategy, allowing people to reveal who they are while revealing nothing of yourself. Not as manipulation, but as mastery. You're not pretending, you're not hiding, you're simply choosing when and how to be seen. And in doing so, you become powerful without needing to appear powerful. So next time someone underestimates you, let them. Let them speak first. Let them believe they're ahead. Let them misread your silence as weakness. Because the more they assume, the more predictable they become. And the more predictable they are, the more advantage you have. The Stoic does not waste energy trying to correct others. He lets their illusions serve a purpose, not to deceive, but to delay. Delay until one moment, the right moment, when clarity can replace explanation. When silence can end a debate, when presence can reset the entire room. Now that you understand the strength of letting them underestimate you, it's time to move deeper into the realm of invisible power, where silence becomes not only defense, but offense, where stillness becomes your sharpest move. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when you no longer need to be seen because you've already taken control. 6. Invisibility is strength. You weren't playing their game, you were building one they couldn't even enter. While they competed for attention, dominance and control, you were operating on a different level, quiet, precise, intentional, and that's why they couldn't see it coming. You didn't challenge them. You didn't try to be louder, stronger, or more visible. You simply didn't react. And in a world built on ego, silence feels like resistance. Detachment feels like defiance. And calmness, it becomes a threat. Let them think they're in control. Let them feel important. Let them mistake your stillness for submission, because something strange begins to happen when you don't flinch, when you don't explain, when you don't seek their approval. Their certainty begins to dissolve, not because you confronted them, but because you didn't. And suddenly, their confidence begins to wobble, their voice loses edge, their gestures grow exaggerated. Because their ego is starving for something you're no longer giving, your reaction. That is the secret of ego. It needs fuel. It feeds off response. It lives for the validation of being able to control how you feel. And when you no longer participate in that cycle, it doesn't know what to do with you. That's when you become unreadable. That's when you become powerful. You are no longer seen as a threat in the way they're used to handling. You become something they don't have a category for. This is why people will call you cold, arrogant, distant, intimidating, even calm, but with an edge they don't know how to name. And they're not wrong. What they're really feeling is discomfort. Not because of what you did, but because of what they can't do to you anymore. They can't push your buttons. They can't predict your reactions. They can't find leverage. So their favorite weapon, your emotional response, no longer exists. And now, they are the ones who feel unsteady. They'll try the same old tricks. The comments, the posturing, the little emotional tests they used to win, but it won't work anymore, because that version of you, the one who used to flinch, explain, seek, and respond, is gone. And when someone keeps pressing buttons that no longer trigger anything, the dynamic changes. They no longer feel powerful, they feel exposed. They're performing for someone who is no longer watching. This is where your invisibility becomes your strength. Not because you disappeared, but because you no longer give them the feedback they crave. You're there, but you're untouchable. You hear what they say, but it doesn't shape you. You see through the performance, but you don't step onto the stage. You let the world move while you hold your ground. You let the noise rise while you remain quiet. That is not weakness. That is restraint. That is clarity. That is mastery. To be invisible in this way doesn't mean to be absent. It means to be present without being provoked. It means to be fully aware and fully intact, while others try to figure out who you are and why their usual strategies don't work on you. It means becoming immune to manipulation, not because you're armored, but because you've transcended the need for attention. You don't need to prove, announce, or defend. You've shifted from external performance to internal alignment, and in that state, your power becomes subtle, sharp, surgical. You don't need to move often, you don't need to speak much, because every move and every word carries weight, not because of its volume, but because of the silence that surrounds it. So let them misjudge your stillness. Let them misunderstand your quiet. Let them write you off while they play out their scenes. Because when the performance ends and the stage clears, you'll still be standing, unmoved, untouched, and far ahead. Now that you've seen how power can come from not being seen at all, it's time to understand the final shift, where your silence not only protects you, but quietly dismantles the illusions others live by. In the next part, you'll learn how to break their entire framework. Without confrontation, without explanation, just presence. 7. Stay silent when they get loud. You've seen it before, maybe in a meeting, maybe around the dinner table, maybe standing in a hallway where the air gets sharp. One person starts speaking louder, not because their idea is better, not because their truth is deeper, but because they believe that volume is power. They raise their voice to fill the room, to dominate the space, to silence everything but their own ego. And the question is, what do you do then? Most people meet volume with volume, intensity with intensity. They feel the need to push back, to rise, to match the energy that's trying to overtake them. But the Stoic doesn't. The Stoic does the opposite. When their voice gets loud, let yours disappear. Because real power doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't flinch or rush to explain. It doesn't seek validation in noise. It holds its presence like an anchor in the middle of a storm. Think of the story of the Zen master and the arrogant warrior. The warrior storms into the temple, shouting, slamming his sword, demanding to see the master. He wants to challenge him, prove he's stronger. The master doesn't speak. He doesn't rise. He continues sweeping the floor, calm and quiet. The warrior grows angrier, louder. Still, the master says nothing. Finally, the warrior throws his sword to the ground and leaves in frustration. That silence wasn't weakness. It was control, it was restraint, and it dismantled the warrior without lifting a hand. That's what silence does. It doesn't resist. It absorbs. It doesn't argue. It reflects. When someone insists they are better than you, when they try to win through ego, let them. Let them believe they've won something. Let them smile as if they've gotten the upper hand. Because while they celebrate, you're studying. You're learning how they move, what they assume, what blind spots they're revealing with every confident word. The louder they speak, the more you understand who they are. And the less you say, the more unpredictable you become. That unpredictability is your advantage, because it leaves them guessing, wondering why you didn't respond, questioning what you're thinking, doubting if they truly have control of the moment. Most people equate silence with submission, but the Stoic knows better. Silence is not absence, it's precision, it's calculation, it's presence without performance. And that kind of presence cannot be bought, handled, or broken. It stands firm, not because it's trying to resist, but because it has no need to react. When someone talks too much, when they try to overwhelm you with certainty, let them. Let them write the story in their mind where they're ahead. Let them underestimate you. Because that story will fall apart the moment reality calls for clarity, not confidence. And when that moment comes, you won't need to argue your way back. You won't need to raise your voice. You'll simply act with calm, with control, and with undeniable precision. The Stoics believed in choosing your response. They trained themselves not to react to every provocation because they understood that reaction is often where power is lost, as Epictetus taught. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. And so, when others get loud, let your discipline get quieter. Let your emotions stay seated. Let your presence do the work your words don't need to. This doesn't mean you stay silent forever. It means you speak when the words matter, when the moment requires it. It means your speech is not driven by impulse, but by clarity. And when you do speak, even if it's just one sentence, the impact is far greater than all the noise they spent building their illusion. So next time someone gets loud, ask yourself, are they trying to win or are they trying to be seen? Most of the time, it's the latter. And the more they try, the more fragile their position becomes. Meanwhile, you've said nothing, but you've seen everything. Let your presence become the silence that absorbs their noise. Let your stillness be the weight that makes them stumble. Because the most powerful strike is the one they never saw coming, not because it was fast, but because it was quiet. And when the illusion finally cracks, when their assumptions crumble under the pressure of your precision, don't celebrate. Just remain still, stoic, steady. Now that you've mastered silence under pressure, there is one last shift to make. In the final part, we'll uncover how the person no one notices often holds all the power, and why disappearing from the game is sometimes the ultimate move of dominance. Sometimes the strongest presence in the room is the one that doesn't ask to be seen. You didn't interrupt, you didn't argue, you didn't fight to prove your worth. You simply stayed rooted, aware, and untouched. And without saying a word, you shifted the entire dynamic. Because when ego plays loud, stillness becomes power. You walked through a storm of pride and noise, but you didn't let it pull you in. You chose not to react. You chose not to perform. You chose to observe, to stay calm, to remain steady. That choice may not have earned applause, but it earned something greater: clarity, control, and quiet confidence. And in a world addicted to attention, that kind of restraint is rare. They may never realize what just happened. They may leave thinking they had the upper hand. But the truth is, you were the one holding the center. Not because you were louder, but because you were anchored. Because the most powerful person in the room, the one no one noticed at first, was you. If this reflection stayed with you, consider subscribing so you can keep building that kind of presence. And if today's message spoke to a moment from your life, type "unmoved" in the comments. Just one word, one truth. You're not here to match their energy, you're here to master your own. And in the next step, we'll explore what it means to win without ever needing to compete. Stay steady. What's coming next will meet you in that silence.